The motion of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6016 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6016, a bill to amend Title V, United States Code, to provide for administrative leave requirements with respect to senior executive service employees and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The U.S. House considering 24 bills this afternoon, voting on 3 of them here. This is the last of the 3. The bill here came out in the wake of the GSA Las Vegas scandal, which would the bill would allow the government to suspend without pay government employees suspected of misusing government funds. This is a 5-minute vote. It'll be the last vote in this series, and then the House will pick up with more debate on suspension bills after these votes. Meanwhile, the House Rules Committee will meet in about 20 minutes, a session to consider Speaker Boehner's fiscal cliff legislation. Republicans using H.J. Res. 66 as the vehicle for so-called Plan B, announced by the Speaker yesterday. Rules Committee members will consider rules for 2 substitute amendments. The one being called Plan B would raise taxes on incomes over $1 million. The alternative would raise taxes on incomes over $250,000. Both of those proposals could come to the House floor on Thursday. We'll have coverage of the House Rules Committee for you at 5:30 Eastern. That'll be on C-SPAN 3, also on cspan.org. Also this afternoon, the Senate is in. They are considering emergency relief funding for Hurricane Sandy victims, and that's underway. The debate's underway. You can follow that on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who yesterday was sworn in as the new President pro tem of the Senate following the death of Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. And Senator Leahy just sent out a press release saying that he will stay on as Judiciary Committee Chairman, saying that chairing the Judiciary Committee and maintaining my seniority on the Appropriations Committee will allow me to protect both the Constitution, and Vermont. He also tweeted congratulations to the new chairman or chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. That'll be Barbara Mikulski of Maryland. She will be the first woman ever to chair that committee. This will be in the 113th Congress.
Mr. Young of Alaska.
We're waiting for Don Young. Way to hold us up, Don.
Mr. Young of Alaska votes aye. Mr. Olver. Mr. Olver votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 402, the nays are 2, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Without objection, the title is amended. Let's get some order and... House will be in order. The House will be in order. House will be in order. Members, please remove your conversations from the floor. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on additional motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Any record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3197 to name the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Spokane, Washington as the Mann Grandstaff Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3197, a bill to name the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Spokane, Washington as the Mann Grandstaff Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Machot, each will control 20 minutes to chair. Members, please remove conversations from the floor. Members in the aisle. As the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 3197 would rename the Medical Center in Spokane the Mann Grandstaff Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center. This legislation would recognize not one, but two. House is not in order.
Remove conversations from the floor. Remove conversations from the floor. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much. Again, this legislation would recognize not one but two American heroes, both Medal of Honor recipients. Private First Class Joe Eugene Mann and Platoon Sergeant Bruce Allen Grandstaff. Their story is nothing less than heroic. I would like to yield at this time the sponsor of this particular piece of legislation, the chairwoman of the Republican Conference, the gentlelady from Washington, to tell you the story.
Recognized for such time as she may consume.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3197, naming the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Spokane, Washington, after two of our local Eastern Washington heroes. the Man Grand Staff, Department of Veteran Affairs Medical Center. Private First Class Joe E. Mann and Platoon Sergeant Bruce A. Grandstaff are heroes from Eastern Washington who gave their last full measure of devotion to our nation. Both men have been awarded the Medal of Honor for their bravery in World War II and Vietnam, respectfully. After graduating from high school in Reardon, Washington, Private First Class Joe E. Mann, like two of his brothers, joined the Army and trained at Fort Lewis in Washington State. 2 years after enlisting, PFC Mann was on the front lines in Best, Holland, where his platoon was surrounded. And in the face of heavy fire, PFC Mann was able to destroy an ammunition dump and took out numerous enemy troops. Despite being wounded 4 times, including both arms, PFC Mann refused to be evacuated and instead remained with his platoon and stood guard that evening. The following morning, the enemy attacked, throwing hand grenades as they approached. A grenade landed within a few feet of PFC Mann. Unable to raise his bandaged arms, PFC Mann yelled "grenade" and threw his body on top of it. Saving his fellow soldiers, PFC Mann died moments after the explosion. For this act of gallantry, PFC Mann was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Born and raised in Spokane, Washington, Platoon Sergeant Bruce A. Grandstaff graduated from North Central High School in 1952 and enlisted in the Army a few years later. In 1966, he volunteered for duty in Vietnam. On May 18, 1967, Platoon Sergeant Grandstaff was leading a weapons platoon when it came under attack. Despite taking heavy fire from 3 directions, he raced into the intense fire to aid his men. Surrounded by 700 enemy troops during a 5-hour siege and being wounded in both legs, Platoon Sergeant Grandstaff continued to fight and encourage his men. Realizing that his position was being overrun, he asked for artillery fire on his exact location, knowing full well it would result in his death. His heroic actions that day immediately saved at least 8 of his fellow brethren and saved many others by alerting them of the enemy's bunkered location. At the time of his death, he had already been awarded the Silver Star for courage, and for his gallantry that day in May, Platoon Sergeant Grandstaff was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Private First Class Mann and Platoon Sergeant Grandstaff are heroes, willing to sacrifice their own lives in order to protect their fellow soldiers. Their selfless advancement of freedom, liberty, justice, and democracy is truly humbling, and I'm honored to represent the legacy both men left behind for Eastern Washington and our nation. Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues to join in honoring these 2 Eastern Washington heroes, Private First Class Joe E. Mann and Platoon Sergeant Bruce A. Grandstaff, and support H.R. 3197. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to offer my support of H.R. 3197, a bill to name the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Spokane, Washington as the Mann Grandstaff Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Private First Class Joe Mann served with the 101st Airborne Division during World War II. He lost his life in the Netherlands, courageously absorbing the blast of a hand grenade with his body to protect those around him while in battle. Later in 1954, Private First Class Mann received the Medal of Honor. Platoon Sergeant Bruce Grandstaff also received the Medal of Honor after his death. Having served in Vietnam, Sergeant Grandstaff found his platoon surrounded by the enemy near Cambodia border and crawled through the front lines to save his comrades. Despite his wounds, he was able to notify the U.S. helicopters of their location and valiantly called for artillery in order to prevent the enemy from advancing. Private First Class Mann and Sergeant Grandstaff went above and beyond the call of duty and made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. It is most appropriate that the VA Medical Center in Spokane be renamed in honor of these two heroes. And I urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, we have no further requests for time at this moment.
Gentleman from Maine.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do also want to thank the sponsor of this legislation, Ms. McMorris Rogers. She's the wife of a retired Navy commander and herself has been proven to be a strong and steadfast advocate for veterans in Washington and around this country. And I also want to say thanks to my good friend, the new ranking member Mike Michaud, for his leadership in helping to move this legislation to the floor. He's been an active and a valuable member of our committee since its first days in Congress almost a decade ago, and he himself have proven himself time and time again a strong voice for Americans' veterans. With that, Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3197. Before I ask for giving away the balance of my time, I do want to ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend all remarks.
Without objection.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3197? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative,
Mr. Speaker,
the rules are suspended. Gentleman from Maine.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Same one. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6443 to designate the facility of the Department of Veterans Affairs located at 9800 West Boulevard in Sunrise, Florida, the William Bill Kling VA Clinic.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6443, a bill to designate the facility of the Department of Veterans Affairs located at 9800 West Commercial Boulevard in Sunrise, Florida, as the William Bill Kling VA Clinic.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Rashad, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. And the legislation before us would name the CBOC, the VA Community-Based Outpatient Clinic in Sunrise, the William Bill Kling VA Clinic. William, better known to Bill, served as a Navy radar technician during the Second World War. When he moved to Plantation in 1973, he continued his service, this time as an advocate for his fellow veterans. He spent 8 years as Florida's Commissioner of Veterans Affairs and 27 years as the President of the Broward Council on Veterans. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I have no further speakers, but I do want to recognize, or I guess reserve the balance of my time so Mr. Michaud can recognize the sponsor of the legislation.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would now like to yield to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Washman-Schultz, the time she needs to explain her bill.
The gentleman is recognized for the time, for however much time she may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman. I thank both gentlemen. I rise to offer H.R. 6443, a bill that will designate the Department of Veterans Affairs Health Clinic located at 9800 West Commercial Boulevard in the city of Sunrise, Florida, as the William Bill Kling VA Clinic. I offer this bill along with the entire Florida House delegation to honor a beloved member of our South Florida veterans community, William Bill Kling, who passed away, sadly, on August 6th at age 84. My deepest appreciation goes out to the Committee on Veterans Affairs and Chairman Miller, who's a good friend from the great state of Florida, for supporting this effort and helping it to come to the floor. Bill was a member of our greatest generation of Americans, serving our nation as a radar technician for the Navy during World War II. But Bill's service to our nation was far from over when he returned from war. In fact, it was just beginning. Bill Kling became a national leader and one of the strongest advocates for our nation's veterans. He was dedicated to helping generations of veterans as they returned to civilian life. He worked tirelessly to make sure our veterans were getting the benefits they deserved, from education under the GI Bill to quality health care through our VA system. I'm sure my Florida colleagues will agree that Bill was a force to be reckoned with, ever brightening our congressional doorways, pushing the urgency of the issue at hand. I know we are all grateful for the remarkable legacy he leaves behind, and he will be sorely missed. In particular, my thoughts and prayers go out to Bill's family, including his children Marcia Mittentag and Stephen Kling. I had the distinct pleasure, Mr. Speaker, of working with Bill for the last 23 years and have witnessed firsthand the many ways he helped thousands of veterans in Florida. I'm also proud to have called him my friend. For the past 7 years, Bill served as the chair of my Military Academy Nominations Board, where he helped the next generation of military leaders realize their dream of serving the country they love. For 8 years, he served on the Florida Commission on Veterans Affairs, and for the past 27 years, as you've heard, he was the president of the Broward County Veterans Council. He also led the Jewish war veterans and was a member of the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Disabled American Veterans. The list of superlatives for Bill is long and shows him as the great American that he was. Bill was inducted into the Broward Senior Hall of Fame, received the Humanitarian of the Year Award from the Dolphin Democrats, and changed the scope of veterans services in South Florida. In particular, he helped bring the Alexander Sandy Nininger Veterans Nursing Home to Pembroke Pines in 2001 and worked with other veterans to create the South Florida National Cemetery in Palm Beach in 2007. One of Bill's greatest accomplishments and lasting legacies was ensuring that veterans would have easy access to quality medical care. Bill noticed that too often veterans in Broward County had to travel too far to go to a VA facility to get the care they needed. With that in mind, he helped open the Oakland Park VA outpatient clinic more than 2 decades ago. When the building the clinic occupied began deteriorating, Bill worked to open a brand new facility. Even though this effort took years, Bill kept a smile on his face and kept working to overcome every obstacle, because that's just how Bill Kling operated. So in 2008, a new 98,000 square foot clinic opened in Sunrise, and fittingly on Bill's birthday. I think it's fair to say that without Bill Kling, this wonderful center that serves thousands of our veterans each year might not exist. With that in mind, my good friend and colleague, Congressman Ted Deutsch, and I and the rest of the Florida delegation offer this legislation today, which will rename the Broward Outpatient Clinic as the William Bill Kling VA Clinic. This is such a fitting way to memorialize and thank Bill Kling. With passage of this bill, every veteran who walks through the doors of the Broward VA Clinic will know the name of the man who did so much for so many. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support passage of this legislation so we may pay tribute to a great American, William Bill Kling. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
I am grateful to my good friend from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, for bringing this legislation to the floor and honoring such a fine gentleman. I also, again, want to thank the ranking member for helping us work so quickly to bring this legislation to the floor. And I would also note that in closing, preliminary cost estimate provided by CBO represents minimal cost to the federal government. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Maine. I rise today and urge unanimous support for H.R. 6443 to designate the Department of Veterans Affairs facility in Sunrise to Bill Kling VA Clinic. Naming this clinic after Bill Kling is more than a way to honor the memory of a great man. It's a most fitting way to acknowledge one of Bill's greatest accomplishments as a tireless advocate for South Florida's veterans. Because of Bill Kling, Florida's veterans are better cared for. Year after year, he fought for the benefits that our veterans so rightfully earned during their service, including education under the GI Bill and health care through the VA. His achievements were many, but it was the opening of the clinic in Sunrise that Bill was the most proud of. He had previously assisted with the establishment of an outpatient clinic in Oakland Park. As the years passed and the facility was no longer suitable to care for the veterans, he started on what would be a 13-year project of establishing a new facility. And after years of obstacles, the clinic opened in 2008 on his birthday, and he commented at the time that the fight was not for a building. The fight was for better health care for our veterans. Now, Thanks to Bill Kling and thanks to his vision, veterans in South Florida have a local VA healthcare facility available to them. The veterans from the west side of the county are able to receive medical assistance without the burden of having to travel long distances. I urge my colleagues to join me in renaming this clinic in his honor. Every veteran cared for in this clinic is part of Bill's lasting legacy, and I'm humbled to remember him today not just as a community leader, but as a friend. I commend Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, my good friend and colleague, for her introduction of this bill and her comments honoring the memory of Mr. Kling. He truly was a caring, a compassionate, and a loyal person and a loyal friend that made everyone who crossed his path feel as though they were the most special person he knew. Finally, Mr. Speaker, when we announced the legislation to rename this facility, at the facility there were some veterans standing out in front waiting to go in. And they asked what the hubbub was about. They asked why all the TV cameras, and I explained to them who Bill Kling was and why this was being done. And they were grateful for the opportunity to know it, and now veterans, just like those veterans when they walk through the front door, will learn not only about Bill Kling, but will learn of his example as a veteran for continuing to work hard every single day for his fellow veterans. What a great honor we're bestowing on his family and by honoring his memory in this way. Again, I urge my colleagues to unanimously support H.R. 6443, honoring this late, great American. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida.
No further speakers at this time.
Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers. I wish to encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6443. And before yielding back my time, I'd also like to thank Chairman Miller and your entire staff for working with the minority staff to bring these two bills before the House. But also want to thank you for your friendship and your guidance over the years as we both served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I look forward to my new role as ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and look forward to working with you and your staff as well. And I want to thank you for your strong advocacy for our veterans, and that's one of the reasons why I think we work very well together, is we have a common goal, a common purpose to help our veterans and their families out. So I want to thank you, look forward to working with you in the upcoming Congress as well as the remainder of this Congress. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back to balance my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days to revise and extend and add any extraneous material for H.R. 6443.
Without objection.
Thanks once again. I appreciate the kind remarks by my good friend, the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I once again encourage all members to support this legislation. Yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6443? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. Gentleman from Maine.
I object to the vote on the quorum that a quorum is not present, and make a point of order: a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed.
Does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon tomorrow.
Without objection, so ordered. House. recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6379.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6379, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 6239 Savannah Highway in Ravenel, South Carolina, as the Representative Curtis B. Bennett, Senior Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume and ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 6379.
Recognized and without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 6379, introduced by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Claiborne, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 6239 Savannah Highway in Ravenel, South Carolina, as the Representative Curtis B. Bennett Senior Post Office. This bill was introduced on September 12th. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bennett is a long-standing and faithful citizen of South Carolina. He was born there in 1931 and attended grade school, college, and graduate school in the state. Later, he taught at Baptist High School in Charleston County and was appointed to the Charleston County Election Commission. He became the mayor of Ravenel, South Carolina, and joined the South Carolina House of Representatives, where he served until 2001. Mr. Speaker, Representative Bennett is a worthy designee of this postal facility naming, and I urge all members to join me in support of this bill. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York, recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I am pleased to join my colleagues in a bipartisan way in the consideration of H.R. 6379 to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 6239 Savannah Highway in Ravenel, South Carolina, as the Representative Curtis B. Bennett Senior Post Office. I am pleased to yield 5 minutes to the distinguished Assistant Democratic Leader, Congressman Claiborne, from the great state of South Carolina, for as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding me the time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6379, naming the post office in Ravenel, South Carolina, after Representative Curtis B. Bennett, Sr. I want to thank my colleagues in the South Carolina Congressional Delegation for their support of this bill. Curtis Bennett was born in Islington, South Carolina, to Cornelius Benjamin Bennett and Eula Lee Stevens Bennett. When Curtis was 11, his father passed away, leaving Curtis as the oldest of 11 siblings to shoulder the responsibility of helping to manage the family farm and look after his younger brothers and sisters. Curtis attended South Carolina State College, and after several years in the United States Army, he became a teacher at Baptist Hill High School in Charleston, South Carolina, where he taught for 13 years. He then became the principal of R.D. Schroeder Middle School, a position he held until his retirement in 1989. His commitment to public service went beyond his passion for education. He and I got started in politics around the same time when he was appointed as the first African American on the Charleston County Election Commission. Later, Curtis would win a seat on the Ravenel Town Council, and in 1982 became the first African American mayor of Ravenel. In 1991, Curtis was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. He retired from the House in 2000. Following the 2001 settlement of a redistricting lawsuit, Curtis became one of 3 African Americans who won seats on the Charleston County Council where he served until 2011. Throughout his tenure, representing his hometown of Ravenel, whether as a mayor, its representative, or on county council, Curtis has been a fierce advocate for the needs of his community. He has broken down barriers throughout his life, and I'm sure the town of Ravenel will be proud to be the home of the Representative Curtis B. Inabinate Sr., United States Post Office. And with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I have no further speakers. Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The lady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, having no other speakers, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Mr. Clyburn has so eloquently put it, this is a fine gentleman, well deserving of having this postal facility named after him, and I urge all the members to support passage of H.R. 6379 and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6379? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. No?
Does the gentlelady make a point of order?
Oh, I do. I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3869.
The clerk will report the bill, the title of the bill.
H.R. 3869, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 600 East Capitol Avenue in Little Rock, Arkansas as the Sidney Sid Sanders McMath Post Office Building.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman yields as much time as he may consume.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add extraneous material to the bill under consideration, H.R. 3869.
Done without objection.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 3869, introduced by the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service, located at 600 East Capitol Avenue in Little Rock, Arkansas, as the Sidney Sid Sanders McMath Post Office Building. The bill was introduced on February 1st and was reported from the Government Oversight and Reform Committee on February 7th. Mr. Speaker, Sid McMath was a prosecuting attorney, decorated United States Marine officer, and the 34th governor of the great state of Arkansas. As a Marine officer, he received the Legion of Merit Silver Star for his heroic leadership during World War II. As governor, McMath championed several infrastructure improvements to benefit his state. This included the paving of primary roads and expanding rural electrification. McMath unfortunately died in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas on Saturday, October 4, 2003. He was given a full military funeral by the U.S. Marine Corps Honor Guard. Mr. Speaker, Mr. McMath is a very worthy designee of this post office naming facility, and I urge all members to join me in support of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized. Ms. Below.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
As a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I am pleased to join my colleagues in the consideration of H.R. 3869 to designate the facility of the U.S. Postal Service located at 600 East Capitol Avenue in Little Rock, Arkansas, as the Sidney Sid Sanders McMath Post Office Building. The bill before us was introduced by Representative Jim Griffin on February 1, 2012. In accordance with committee requirements, H.R. 3869 is co-sponsored by all members of the Arkansas delegation and was reported out of the Oversight Committee by unanimous consent on June 27, 2012. As a former two-term governor for Arkansas, Sidney Sanders McMath started his career as an enlisted officer with the U.S. Marine Corps. Having fought in the battle for the Solomon Islands in World War II, Mr. McMath would earn the rank of lieutenant colonel for his courageous efforts in the war. When he retired from the U.S. Marine Corps, his rank was Major General. A decorated war hero, McMath would return to his hometown of Hot Springs in time to be elected as a local prosecutor. Earning a reputation as a reformer, he worked tirelessly to rid the local government of corruption. His noble actions and hard work would carry him to victory in the 1948 election to become governor of Arkansas. Leading the way as a reformist in all manners, McMath fought for civil rights for African Americans and modernized the Arkansas transportation infrastructure. His hard work and determination has cemented his legacy in Arkansas's history. To commemorate Sidney Sid Sanders McMath, I ask that we pass the measure before us, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would like to yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of Bill H.R. 3869. This bill would designate the facility of the United States Post Office located at 600 East Capitol Avenue in Little Rock as the Sidney Sid Sanders McMath Post Office Building. Sid McMath is one of Arkansas's finest sons, and he dedicated his life to serving Arkansas and our country. He was the 34th governor of Arkansas and served as a U.S. Marine in World War II. He received the Silver Star for his valor during the Battle of Piva Forks. Sid McMath was born in Columbia County, Arkansas on June 14, 1912. In high school, he was a skilled boxer and won the state Golden Gloves title. He worked his way through college at the University of Arkansas by waiting tables, washing dishes, and fighting in exhibition boxing matches. After college, he served as a United States Marine during World War II, where he distinguished himself in combat and earned the Silver Star and the Legion of Merit. In 1948, Sid McMath was elected as the 34th governor of Arkansas, serving from 1949 to 1953. As governor, he was a staunch advocate for civil rights, fighting to uphold voting rights for all Americans and working to abolish the poll tax. After serving as governor, he continued his service to his nation as a member of the Marine Corps Reserve, rising to the rank of Major General. In 1967, he founded the Marine Corps Junior ROTC at Catholic High School for Boys in Little Rock. Many of the cadets, known as Sid's Kids, have followed his example by serving our country. Governor McMath passed away in 2003 at the age of 91 in Little Rock. His autobiography, Promises Kept, was posthumously awarded the Arkansas Historical Association's highest accolade, the John G. Ragsdale Prize. Today, we honor Sid McMath's dedication and service to his state and nation by installing a permanent marker of his contribution to Arkansas and America. His example is one all Americans and Arkansans can admire, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill to honor his legacy. I yield back.
The gentleman from Arkansas yields back. The chair recognizes the gentle lady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, having no other speakers, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentle lady yields. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with Representative Griffin in urging all of our members to support the naming of the Sidney Sid Sanders McMath Post Office Building. Urge support of this bill and yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3869? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
To the vote. On the ground.
In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to recognize is laid on the table.
I object.
The gentle lady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3378.
The clerk will report the bill, the title of the bill.
H.R. 3378, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 220 Elm Avenue in Ewingson, Michigan, as the Elizabeth L. Kinnearan Post Office Building.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentle lady from New York, Mrs. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume and ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and add extraneous material to the record regarding H.R. 3378.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 3378, introduced by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Benechek, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service, located at 220 Elm Avenue in Muncie, Michigan, as the Elizabeth L. Kinnearan Post Office Building. This bill was introduced November 4th, 2011, and reported from the Government Oversight and Reform Committee on February the 7th. Mr. Speaker, Elizabeth Kinnearan was a strong pillar of her community in Muncie, Michigan. She and her husband, Oscar, operated a boarding house in Marquette, Michigan, and together they raised 11 children. 2 of their sons fought bravely for their country and tragically gave their lives. Her son, Biso, was killed in action during World War II. Her son, Raymond, was killed during the Korean War. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Kinnearan is a very worthy designee of this postal facility naming, and I urge all members to join me in support of this bill.
The gentleman reserves. The gentle lady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentle lady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I am pleased to join my colleagues in the consideration of H.R. 3378 to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 220 Elm Avenue in Musing, Michigan, as the Elizabeth L. Kinnearan Post Office Building. The bill before us was introduced by my colleague Dan Benechek on November 4, 2011. In accordance with committee requirements, H.R. 3378 is co-sponsored by all members of the Michigan delegation and was reported out of the Oversight Committee by a voice vote on February 7, 2012. Elizabeth Kinnearan has a very special place in America's heart due to her personal sacrifice for our country. Mrs. Kinnearan is what we call a double Gold Star mother. Her son, Biso, was killed in action during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Unfortunately, years later, her son, Raymond, was killed during the Korean War, while a third son, Reno, served in West Germany during the same war. No mother should have to lose two sons to war, but her family's sacrifice will forever be part of history, and I ask that we pass this bill with no reservation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume to my distinguished colleague from the state of Michigan, Mr. Benishek.
The gentleman, Mr. Banachek from Michigan, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor today to urge my colleagues to support my legislation, H.R. 3378, a bill to name the post office building in Munising, Michigan, after the late Mrs. Elizabeth Keenanen. Mrs. Keenanen's story is like that of many people from northern Michigan and all across this nation. It's a story of an immigrant who came to this country in hopes of a better life and left America a better place. Mrs. Keenanen came to our country from Finland in 1903. She married Oskar Keenanen in 1909. They had 11 children, and like parents do all across this country, they worked hard all their lives to ensure that their children would have a shot at the American dream. Mr. and Mrs. Keenanen operated a boarding house in Marquette, Michigan. They provided warm beds to many timber and mining workers in Marquette County. Eventually, they moved to Munising, Michigan, where Oskar worked for the paper company and Elizabeth worked as a local cook. Mrs. Keenanen was a faithful member of the Messiah Lutheran Church in Munising. Mrs. Keenanen's life was marked with tragedy. Two of her sons, Esau and Raymond, were both killed in war while defending the freedoms we cherish so much. Esau was killed in action during the Battle of the Bulge in 1945, and Raymond lost his life during the Korean War in 1952. We will never know the devastating grief their family must have suffered after such an enormous loss. We will also never be able to fathom the somber dignity Mrs. Keenanen must have felt, in the words of President Lincoln, to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Mrs. Elizabeth Keenanen died in April 5, 1974, at the age of 81. She is not famous. Her name does not grace history books, but Mrs. Keenanen's life, the hard work she did, the family she raised, the terrible sacrifices she endured, is a small but important part of this long story that we call the United States. It is countless lives like hers that have made this country the greatest nation in the world. Naming this post office in her honor is a thoughtful and lasting way for the community of Munising to celebrate her life and accomplishments. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan yields back the balance of his time. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, having no further speakers, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from New York yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge all members to support the passage of H.R. 3378 and yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields, and the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3378? Those in favor say aye. And those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
I object.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4389.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4389, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 19 East Merced Street in Fowler, California, as the Cecil E. Bolt Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentlelady from New York, Mrs. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume and respectfully ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4389, introduced by the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service, located at 19 East Merced Street in Fowler, California, as the Cecil E. Bolt Post Office. This bill was introduced on April 18th and was reported favorably from the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform on June the 27th. Mr. Speaker, Cecil Bolt was drafted into the Army just prior to the start of World War II. He was assigned to the 75th Artillery Unit in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. After the war, Mr. Bolt returned to Fowler, California, and was appointed postmaster in 1947. He's known for his friendly service, especially delivering packages on Christmas Eve, something at this time of the year we can all appreciate. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bolt passed away on February 9th, 2007. Nonetheless, he is fondly remembered by many family members and friends. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bolt is a very worthy designee of this postal facility naming, and I urge all members to join me in support of this bill and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves, and the chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Malone.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I am pleased to join my colleagues in the consideration of H.R. 4389, which was introduced by my good friend and colleague, Representative Jim Costa, from the great state of California. I now yield him as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 4389, and I thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding me the time to speak on behalf of the naming of this post office in Fowler, California, on behalf of Cecil E. Bolt, who was the postmaster there for many, many years. Today is a great day for the city of Fowler and for its community and the city council, who over a year ago overwhelmingly came to me and asked that we dedicate and name, appropriately so, the post office at Fowler, California, on behalf of the postmaster who served the city and the community so well for so many years. Fowler is a wonderful community in my district of over 5,000 people that could be of many communities that we have throughout the country, with a high school, with generations of families that have lived there for years. As a matter of fact, one of our colleagues, Congresswoman Jackie Spears' mother, was born in Fowler, California. We today name the post office after Cecil E. Bolt. He was born and raised in Idaho, but like many, came to California. After graduating from college, Mr. Bolt moved to Fowler in 1939. Just prior to World War II, he was drafted into the U.S. Army and as was noted, was assigned to the 75th Artillery Unit in Alaska. Cecil Bolt was part of, as Tom Brokaw wrote, America's greatest generation. In 1942, he married the love of his life, Naomi Opal Gorley, and together they raised 2 loving daughters, Dorothy and Kathy Jean. Bolt, after the war, returned to Fowler and was appointed the postmaster, a position which he held for 27 years. Known for his dedication and friendly demeanor, as many times he would personally deliver packages, not just during the Christmas season, but throughout the year, because, of course, everybody knew Cecil. His decades of public service extended far beyond the walls of the post office, which centered as a hub of activity for the community. Cecil volunteered every day for more than 17 years at the Marshall Elementary School, where his service helped shape a generation of young people. He was also a faithful and active member of the Presbyterian Church of Fowler, where he also served as a Sunday school teacher and the Kids Club volunteer. For his service, he received the Fowler Citizen of the Year Award in 1969 and the Silent Servant of the Year Award in 2004. Sadly, after years and years of service, Cecil Bolt passed away in 2007. Those in the city of Fowler who knew him were undoubtedly better off thanks to the good service of Postmaster Bolt. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the city of Fowler and its city council and overwhelming support of citizens of the city and students who wrote in postcards asking that we do this in his honor without reservation recognize the post office in the city of Fowler to be named after Postmaster Cecil E. Bolt in dedication to his family and the community of Fowler, as well as the United States Postal Service. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Having no other speakers at this time, I continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman